And welcome back. We are now at the point where we can make our sprite sheet for this character. Now, as we think about this, we know we have a 32 by 32 image, but we also need to think about how many frames do we have. Now, there are different ways that we can go about tackling this, and that involves what kind of movement is going on with this. So let's start by looking at our idle animation. If we look, we have 2 frames here, so it means we have 2 unique frames of animation here. So that's just the character, of course, moving. And then we also have our jump animation, which right now has 4 frames of movement. However, if I look closely at that jump animation, I do have a loop in here. So I can effectively remove 2 frames out of here. And I can still have the same animations. And that can save me when I have my sprite sheet of creating yet another cell that I need to have filled in. So I now am at 4 frames of animation. Now we have our running animation, which if we look, we have this 2, 3, 4, but we also have a duplicated frame here because this is the same as frame 1. So really, if we think about this, we have our idle animation, which has 2 frames. We have our jump animation, which has 2 frames. And we have, lastly, our running animation, which actually has 3 frames of animation. It's just that one of those frames is duplicated. So we have here 7 frames of animation. Now, what does that mean for us in creating our sprite sheet? It means that we could, of course, just add in this other frame of animation here. But if we were to put that in there, that is more data that would be within that file. And so really, we're going to end up having one cell open if we make, for example, like a 4x2 sheet, or we can go ahead and make something like a 1x7. Now, for today's purpose, let's just go ahead and stick with the 4x2 that we're very familiar with, or a 2x4, because that's just going to be easier for us to work with, and we'll just have one empty cell within that sprite sheet. So let's go ahead and create our new animation here. We're going to set up for our sprite sheet. Remember, this is 32 pixels by 32 pixels. So for example, if I want to have 4 frames across, I want to do 32 times 4. And if we don't remember how to do that, we can grab almighty calculator here and just do 32 times 4. And that will tell us exactly 128 is the width that we need for this sprite sheet. Now the height, of course, is going to be 2 down, so we can just double that. So that's just going to be 64. And we're going to go ahead and create that. And here's our sprite sheet. And let's set up our guides so that way we can know exactly what we're going to need. Now, if remember, we're doing a 4 and 2, so let's do 4 by 2 and click OK. And you can see we have our sprite sheet established here for what we want it to do. Now I'm going to go ahead and close the frame animation window just so that's out of my way for now. And let's first start by using either our running one, our jump one, or idle one. It doesn't matter, but once you're ready to do so, it's just a matter of simply dragging those individual pieces on over to our sprite sheet, much as we have done in the past. Making sure snap is on so we get a nice crisp piece in there. So if I look, I should make sure snap is on under my view options. And let's go ahead and grab our other idle animation pose and drop them in here. And notice I'm putting the 2 idle animations side by side. And there's a reason for that. It's because these 2 animations are very similar. I want them to pretty much be, from a design perspective, to be right next to each other. So that way, if I had to come back and say, well, what were the idle animations? I know that this animation is going to be right next to this one, which means these are probably 2 things that are very similar. All right, let's do the jump animation next. So we're going to bring him on over. Go ahead and align that one in. And just like that, we already have our sprite sheet halfway done. Now, when we look at our running animation, remember we said that there is 1 frame that is in here that is duplicated. All right, and when we go ahead and put this in here, we of course could put this frame back in here if we want, but if we do that, we are of course telling the computer, hey, I need you to put more data again within this cell. And so effectively, we would be using up resources that could be tied for something else. For example, if this is a game, that's that much data that has to be processed for the computer to be able to know what to do with. Now, of course, now we have our sprites all in here, and it is okay that this cell right now is open. We don't have any other animation. Now, we could, of course, create, for example, we could come back to here and say, you know what, I want to make a whole nother running animation, and that way it's filled in. that's all viable things that we can do. But from our design perspective, this is perfectly possible. Now, again, if you said, I don't want even to have this bit of spare data here, you could, of course, go and design this into a 7x1 or 1x7 sprite sheet, and that would still be perfectly okay. However, a lot of times when we see sprite sheets, they're often done in multiples like this. You don't usually see a single row or column, but it is still something that's perfectly viable. But here's a nice 4x2 right here, and again, this right here is better than filling in with this sprite sheet again, simply because from a resource perspective, this is not going to be having as much data to be processed because there is nothing within inside of this cell here. All right, and that is going to wrap up what we have started with our character animation. We started off just by designing a character. We added a couple different cycles into that character, and of course, we've animated them, and we've also put them into a sprite sheet. Now, the one thing that we really didn't address with this character per se is what would we do if we wanted this character to be on a different background. Now, notice here we have this all filled in with black, and there's nothing wrong with him having that black background for the purpose of this exercise. However, most of the time when we were going to set up something like this, we would leave this transparent. We would never fill in a black background, except for maybe if we wanted just to test something out to see how it looks. Simply because if we wanted to put this against, let's say, a different background, then we would have to address this black transparency zone. And even in these areas around the light, because we have that blur effect on here, even though these look black, some of these zones aren't exactly black. We'd actually have to come in here and effectively remove this whole torch area and effectively almost repaint it, which of course could be a lot of work. But for the purpose of this starting exercise, this is a nice, good visual example of how to do some of that. What we haven't done is looked at how we can take these same techniques now and apply that not to just a character sprite, but also to things such as backgrounds and other objects within the world. And so that's what we're going to look at next when we pick up into our next video.